The Duke of Blackwood stared at the numbers as if they were a personal affront. They were not merely figures in a ledger. They were an indictment, a quiet, orderly battalion of ink marching his dynasty toward the cliff of insolvency. The name Blackwood had been a synonym for power for 400 years, a granite edifice of land, title, and influence. Now, Alistair felt its foundations crumbling to dust beneath his feet, a decay so profound he could almost smell it in the aging paper of the account books. It was the scent of genteel desperation, of port wine cellars thinning out, of tenant farms falling fallow, of quiet, inexorable ruin. He ran a hand through his dark hair, the gesture sharp with an impotence he loathed. His father had been a man of grand gestures and catastrophic investments. His grandfather, a man of appetites and blissful ignorance. They had bequeathed to him a magnificent title and a hollowed-out inheritance. The Blackwood diamond, it seemed, was mostly glass. A precise cough from the doorway announced the arrival of Lord Cranley, the family solicitor. Cranley was a man constructed of dry parchment and quiet pragmatism, his face a mask of professional sympathy that did little to conceal the hard calculus beneath. He had been managing the decline for a decade. "Your Grace," Cranley began, his voice as crisp as a new banknote. He placed a slim portfolio on the vast mahogany desk, a stark and modern intrusion upon the landscape of inherited chaos. A solution presents itself. Alistair did not look up from the ledger. "Unless it involves the discovery of a gold mine under the West Wing, Cranley, I am not in the mood for solutions. I am in the mood for a miracle." "Miracles are in short supply," the solicitor said calmly. "Fortunately, dowries are not." He tapped the portfolio. "Miss Eleanor Vance." The name was unfamiliar, which was, in itself, telling. It was not a name from the well-trod paths of the aristocracy. Alistair finally looked up, his expression a mixture of disdain and weary curiosity. "Vance? Of the shipping Vances? The ones who smell of trade and new money?" "The very same," Cranley confirmed, unperturbed. "Her father, Sir Reginald, has amassed a fortune that would make a king blush. He has also amassed a daughter of marriageable age who, despite her prospects, remains on the shelf." "Let me guess," Alistair drawled, a bitter irony lacing his tone. "She is plain, charmless, and possesses the social grace of a dock worker." "She is quiet," Cranley offered, a masterpiece of diplomatic understatement. "She is intelligent, I am told. But her father is desperate for a title. He wishes to launder his fortune through the aristocracy. He wants a duchess for a daughter." Cranley paused, letting the weight of the proposition settle in the dusty air. "Her dowry would not merely stay the creditors, Your Grace. It would restore the Blackwood fortune to its former glory. It would allow you to rebuild." Alistair leaned back in his chair, the worn leather groaning in protest. A marriage of convenience, a bartering of his ancient name for a merchant's gold. It was a vulgar transaction, a capitulation to the modern world he so despised. But the numbers on the page before him were unyielding. They did not care for pride or lineage. They cared only for balance, and his were disastrously imbalanced. He thought of the estate. The leaking roofs of the tenant cottages, the overgrown gardens, the once great library where books were beginning to mildew. He thought of the duty he owed to the name, to the land, to the future dukes who might one day inherit something more than a pile of debts and a tarnished legacy. "She will expect to run the household, I suppose," Alistair mused aloud, the thought irritating him. He envisioned a merchant's daughter, her head full of bourgeois notions of thrift, pinching pennies and questioning the wine bill. He imagined having to explain the nuances of a ducal establishment to a woman whose ancestors had likely sold the goods his had consumed. "That can be managed," Cranley said smoothly. A week later, Alistair found himself observing his future bride from across a crowded ballroom. Lady Danbury's annual crush was the perfect theater for such an appraisal. He saw her immediately, not because she stood out, but because she did not. Miss Eleanor Vance was a study in beige. Her gown was a tasteful but unremarkable shade of cream, her hair a simple brown knot, her posture straight but unassuming. She was not plain, not precisely. Her features were regular, her eyes a clear, intelligent gray. But she possessed an aura of such profound stillness that the eye simply slid over her, seeking more vibrant, more engaging prospects. She was present, and she was absent. She was there, and she was not there. She held a glass of lemonade and watched the swirling dancers with an unnerving placidity. She was not seeking a partner, not attempting to catch an eye. She was simply observing, her gaze analytical, almost detached. It was the look of a spectator, not a participant. For a woman whose father was trying to buy her a duke, she seemed remarkably uninterested in the market. He made his way toward her, the crowd parting before him, as it always did. The power of the title was still potent, even if the coffers that supported it were empty. He saw the moment she registered his approach. There was no flutter of her fan, no blush, no coy lowering of her eyes. There was only a slight, almost imperceptible straightening of her spine, a quiet bracing for impact. Their conversation was brief, stilted, and utterly correct. He spoke of the weather. She agreed it was mild for the season. He commented on the music. She allowed that the orchestra was competent. There was no artifice in her, but there was also no warmth. It was like conversing with a well-made clock, precise, functional, and utterly devoid of soul. He felt a grim certainty settle over him. This was a business transaction, and she was, if nothing else, businesslike. The formal proposal took place in her father's ostentatiously appointed library 2 days later. Sir Reginald Vance, a man whose booming voice and florid complexion spoke of decades of marketplace triumphs, could barely contain his glee. Eleanor sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. Alistair laid out the terms with a cold precision he knew was insulting. It was not a proposal of marriage, it was the reading of a contract. He spoke of the union of their families, the mutual benefits, the securing of legacies. He did not speak of affection or companionship or any of the softer illusions that typically cloaked such arrangements. When he had finished, there was a heavy silence. Sir Reginald beamed, ready to accept on his daughter's behalf. But before he could speak, Eleanor's quiet voice cut through the air. "Your Grace," she said, her gray eyes meeting his directly for the first time. "I have a question regarding the Blackwood estate." Alistair raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Indeed? The southern forests," she continued, her tone even and measured. "The timber yields have been declining for the past 5 years, according to the public records. Is that a result of poor forestry management, or is the land itself becoming exhausted?" The question was so specific, so technical, that it momentarily stunned him. It was not the query of a young lady interested in her future home's gardens. It was the question of an investor examining a portfolio. He felt a flicker of annoyance, then a grudging respect. It was a sharp, intelligent question. The land was indeed exhausted, a fact his own estate manager had been complaining about for years. "A combination of factors," he answered, keeping his voice level. "It is a matter my steward has under advisement." "I see," she said. The moment passed. She said nothing more. He dismissed it later as a coached remark. Her father, the canny merchant, had likely fed her the line to make her appear shrewd. It was a parlor trick, nothing more. The thought solidified his initial assessment of her. She was a vessel for her father's ambition and fortune, a quiet container to be filled with his ducal name. That evening, in the solitude of his own study, he penned a letter to Cranley confirming the engagement. He detailed the final arrangements of the settlement, the transfer of funds, the legal necessities. And then, in a moment of arrogant reassurance, both to his solicitor and to himself, he added a final, dismissive paragraph. "The Duchess-to-be seems docile enough. She will present no difficulties. Her father has clearly attempted to drill some semblance of business acumen into her, but it is a thin veneer. She has never managed anything more complex than a tea tray, I am sure. So the running of the household and all estate matters will remain under my direct and sole supervision. She will have her title and her allowance. I will have my solvency. A perfectly equitable arrangement. He signed the letter, sanded it, and had a footman make a copy for his files. The original was sent to Cranley. The copy was placed in the top drawer of his desk, a testament to his own foresight and control. He felt, for the first time in months, a sense of grim satisfaction. He had secured his legacy. He had done his duty. The cost was a quiet, beige wife. It seemed a small price to pay. The wedding was a grand affair, funded entirely by Sir Reginald, a final, triumphant advertisement of his daughter's spectacular acquisition. Eleanor moved through the day with the same placid composure she had shown in the ballroom. She spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice. She stood beside him at the reception, a pale statue in white silk. She was the Duchess of Blackwood, and she was a stranger. In the weeks that followed, she settled into Blackwood Manor like a fine layer of dust. Her presence was felt but rarely seen. She took her meals with him in the cavernous dining hall, their conversations brief and formal. She established her own sitting room, where she spent her days reading or engaged in correspondence. She was impeccably polite, impeccably dressed, and impeccably distant. Alistair was, for the most part, relieved. Her dowry, a truly staggering sum, flowed into the Blackwood accounts. Creditors who had been circling like vultures were paid off. The most urgent repairs to the manor and the tenant farms were commissioned. The gnawing anxiety that had been his constant companion for years began to recede. He had his solvency, as promised. The arrangement was working. He left the running of the household to Mrs. Gable, the formidable housekeeper who had been at Blackwood since his own mother's time. He assumed Eleanor was content with her books and her new status. He did not ask. He did not think to ask. She was a problem solved. A column moved from the debit to the credit side of his life's ledger. One rainy Tuesday, about a month into their marriage, Eleanor requested access to the estate office. It was Alistair's private domain, the nerve center of his crumbling empire. He was surprised by the request, but saw no reason to deny it. "I find I have a great deal of time on my hands, Your Grace," she explained, her voice even. "I thought I might familiarize myself with the household accounts. It would be an amusement." He felt a prickle of his earlier irritation. The image of her, a merchant's daughter, poring over his family's finances was vaguely distasteful. But her reasoning was sound enough. It was her home now, in a manner of speaking. And amusement seemed a harmless enough motivation. "As you wish, Duchess," he said, the title still feeling foreign on his tongue when applied to her. "The keys are with Mrs. Gable." He thought no more of it. That afternoon, Eleanor entered the estate office for the first time. The room smelled of old leather, wood smoke, and failure. It was a masculine space, cluttered and disordered. Papers were piled precariously on every surface. The great desk was a battlefield of unpaid bills, threatening letters, and hastily scrawled notes. She ran a gloved finger over its surface, leaving a clean track in the dust. Her gaze fell upon the top drawer. It was slightly ajar, driven by a curiosity she could not name, a quiet instinct for the heart of things. She pulled it open. Inside, nestled amongst seals and sticks of wax, was a file of recent correspondence. On top lay the copy of a letter, written in the Duke's bold, arrogant hand. It was addressed to Lord Cranley. She picked it up. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She read it from the beginning, her expression unchanging. She read of the legal arrangements, the transfer of funds. It was all as she had expected. Cold, transactional. Then she reached the final paragraph. "She has never managed anything more complex than a tea tray, I am sure, so the running of the household and all estate matters will remain under my direct and sole supervision." Eleanor read the sentence twice. The world did not shrink. No tears pricked her eyes. No gasp escaped her lips. The rain continued to patter against the window pane. The clock on the mantelpiece continued to tick, but inside her, something shifted. It was not anger she felt. It was a profound, clarifying coldness. It was the quiet, clean certainty of a mathematician finding the elegant proof to a complex problem. He had not married a partner. He had purchased a remedy. He did not see a woman. He saw a walking, breathing bank draft. He saw a tea tray. Very well. She folded the letter with meticulous care, aligning the edges perfectly, pressing the original creases back into place with her thumbnail. She slid it back into the file, back into the drawer. She closed the drawer. The sound was soft, a mere whisper of wood on wood, but to her, it was a door closing, a vault being sealed. She turned her attention to the room, to the chaotic piles of paper, the dusty ledgers, the scent of decay. He believed she could not manage. He believed she was an ornament, a quiet, docile accessory to his salvation. He was wrong. She would not confront him. She would not rage or weep. Words were his currency, the currency of aristocrats and politicians, inflated, unreliable, and easily spent. Her currency, the one her father had taught her, was numbers. It was order. It was results. She would not manage a tea tray. She would manage everything. The change was so subtle at first that Alistair did not notice it. The tide of his relief was still high, and it obscured the small, significant shifts in the landscape of his life. He noticed that the food at dinner improved, the menus more thoughtful, less reliant on the dwindling and expensive stocks of the wine cellar. He noticed that the constant, low-grade grumbling of the staff seemed to have ceased. The house ran with a new, quiet efficiency. He attributed it to Mrs. Gable finally having a proper budget to work with. He spent his days riding out on the estate, overseeing the repairs his new fortune allowed. He met with his steward, who was uncharacteristically optimistic. The tenants were paying their rents on time. Two of the farms that had been on the verge of failure were suddenly showing a small profit. "It's the Duchess, Your Grace," the steward, a weathered man named Harris, explained one morning. "She sent down a new system for crop rotation and market scheduling. Had me sell the spring lambs a fortnight early when the London prices peaked. Never would have thought of it myself. Made an extra £100. Alistair frowned. "The Duchess?" "Aye. Sends down notes. Asks for the weekly yield reports. Sharp as a tack, she is. Asks questions I can barely answer." Alistair felt that same flicker of irritation he'd experienced during their betrothal meeting. He dismissed it again. She was amusing herself, playing at being a lady of the manor. It was harmless. As long as she did not interfere with his larger plans, she could rearrange the crop rotations to her heart's content. But the instances began to accumulate. They were like stones dropped into a still pond, the ripples slowly expanding until they could no longer be ignored. He went to the library to consult a book on architecture and found it not only reorganized but fully catalogued, a neat ledger on a lectern detailing every volume by author and subject. A task he had meant to get to for years. The librarian, a dusty academic who was part of the Blackwood fixtures, credited the Duchess. "Her Grace has a remarkable mind for systems," he'd chirped. Remarkable. He noticed the silence. That was perhaps the most profound change. Before, the house had been filled with the noise of inefficiency, the clatter of a dropped tray, the raised voice of a frustrated servant, the anxious murmurings of Mrs. Gable outside his study. Now there was a deep, humming quiet, the quiet of a perfectly calibrated machine, and the quiet of his wife. She had always been reserved, but now her silence had a different quality. It was not shy, it was deliberate. At dinner, she would answer his direct questions with polite, concise responses, and then fall silent again. She no longer offered even the smallest pleasantry. She was a physical presence, elegant and composed at the other end of the long table. But her spirit, her attention, was elsewhere. He found himself watching her, trying to decipher the thoughts behind those calm gray eyes. He found himself failing. Her absence became a presence in itself. He began to notice the empty chair in the drawing room where she never sat, the untouched sheet music on the pianoforte she never played, the closed door of her sitting room behind which she conducted a life he knew nothing about. He was not a man given to introspection. He dealt with the tangible world, land, horses, politics. But the intangible atmosphere of his own home had shifted, and it unnerved him. The house felt less like his own and more like a well-run hotel in which he was merely a guest. He felt a strange sense of displacement, of being managed along with the crops and the household accounts. The turning point came on a Thursday evening. He had invited Lord Fitzwilliam, a neighbor and a rival, for dinner. Fitzwilliam was a gossip, a man who took pleasure in the misfortunes of others, and Alistair knew he had been watching the Blackwood decline with predatory interest. The dinner was a quiet display of his restored fortunes. The silver was polished, the food excellent, the wine a respectable claret. "Well, Blackwood," Fitzwilliam said, swirling the wine in his glass, "it seems the rumors of your demise were greatly exaggerated. One hears you've come into a spot of good fortune." The insinuation was clear, his eyes flicking for a moment toward Eleanor at the far end of the table. Before Alistair could offer a clipped retort, Eleanor spoke. Her voice was cool and clear. "The Duke has not come into fortune, Lord Fitzwilliam," she said, her gaze steady. "He has married it. There is a difference." The statement was bald, brutally honest. It sucked the air from the room. Fitzwilliam looked momentarily stunned, then smirked, clearly delighted by this crack in the ducal facade. Alistair felt a hot flush of anger and embarrassment. She had not defended him. She had stated a fact, as dispassionately as if she were quoting the price of wheat. She had reduced their marriage, in front of his rival, to the crude transaction it was. After Fitzwilliam's gleeful departure, Alistair found her in the drawing room. "What was the meaning of that?" he demanded, his voice tight. She looked up from her book. "The meaning of what, Your Grace? Your comment to Fitzwilliam, it was unseemly. Was it untrue?" "So," she asked, her voice betraying no emotion. "That is not the point. You are the Duchess of Blackwood. There is a certain loyalty, a certain presentation, that is expected." End of quote. "I was under the impression," she said, her words precise and devastatingly calm, "that my role was to provide financial stability, not social defense. I have fulfilled my side of the bargain. The household is solvent." She closed her book with a soft snap. "If you will excuse me," she swept from the room, leaving him standing in a state of profound shock. The coldness of her words, the utter lack of any shared feeling or partnership, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had expected a docile wife. He had gotten a creditor, one who had fulfilled her contract and now felt no further obligation. He began to look. Really look. He went to the estate office the next morning. The chaos was gone. In its place was an almost Spartan order. The bills were filed, the correspondence answered and sorted. On the great desk, where his own chaotic ledgers had once sat, there were new ones. He opened the top volume. The handwriting was fine, elegant, and ruthlessly clear. Columns of figures, perfectly aligned. Notes in the margins in a script so small it was almost microscopic. She had not merely been amusing herself. This was the work of months. This was the work of a master. He began to trace the flow of money. He saw how his wife had consolidated the debts, renegotiating the terms with a shrewdness that would have impressed Cranley himself. He saw how she had analyzed every single expenditure of the estate, from the cost of beeswax candles to the price of seed grain. Waste had been identified and eliminated with surgical precision. He saw the notes from the steward, Harris, and her replies. Harris would report a problem blight in a potato field, a leaking mill roof, and she would have already researched and outlined 3 possible solutions, complete with cost-benefit analyses. She had arranged for the sale of timber from a different, healthier forest, the one he had dismissed, and secured a contract at a price 20% higher than his father had ever managed. He went through ledger after ledger, his bewilderment turning into a dawning, horrified awe. She had not just stopped the bleeding. She had not just restored them to solvency. He followed the columns to the final pages, to the most recent entries. He checked the totals, his breath catching in his throat. He checked them again. It was impossible. But the numbers did not lie. The Blackwood estate was running at a surplus. A small one, to be sure, but it was there. Black ink. For the first time in 3 generations, there was black ink. He sank into his chair. The ledger opened before him. The sheer scale of her competence was overwhelming. The intelligence, the discipline, the relentless hard work it must have taken. Months of it. All conducted in silence, without a single word to him. She had single-handedly resurrected his ancestral home while he had been riding his horse and congratulating himself on his clever marriage. He thought of her quiet presence at the dinner table. He thought of her one astute question about timber yields. He thought of the librarian, the steward, the housekeeper, all singing her praises. He thought of her cold, dismissive words the night before. My role was to provide financial stability. I have fulfilled my side of the bargain. And then a memory surfaced, sharp and sickening. The letter to Cranley. His blood ran cold. He scrambled to the desk, yanking open the top drawer. He fumbled through the file, his hands shaking, and there it was. The copy, folded perfectly. Too perfectly, as if it had been handled recently, its creases reinforced. He snatched it up and read his own arrogant, dismissive words. She has never managed anything more complex than a tea tray, I am sure. He stared at the sentence, and the entire world realigned itself around him. The past 4 months did not snap into focus. They crashed down upon him with the weight of an avalanche. Her silence was not docility. It was judgment. Her efficiency was not an amusement. It was a rebuttal. Her coldness was not her nature. It was her answer. He had looked at her and seen a simple tool, a solution to his problems. He had written her off as an empty-headed ornament before he even knew her. And in response, she had not argued or complained. She had simply, quietly, and devastatingly proven him wrong. She had taken his crumbling, mismanaged world, and she had ordered it. She had taken his legacy of failure, and she had balanced the books. He felt a shame so profound it was a physical sickness, a burning in his gut. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant, condescending fool. He had not just misjudged her. He had been unworthy of even standing in the same room with her. He dropped the letter on the desk as if it had burned him. He looked around the ordered, efficient room, at the evidence of her brilliance. This was not the work of a duchess playing at accounts. This was the work of a general commanding a battlefield, and she had won. He had to find her. He had to say, what? What could he possibly say? I'm sorry felt like a pebble thrown into a canyon. Thank you was an insult. He bolted from the room, a man undone, searching for the wife he had never bothered to meet. He searched the drawing room, the library, her sitting room. They were all empty, pristine spaces that seemed to hold their breath in her absence. A maid curtsying in the hallway informed him that the Duchess was often in the old conservatory. The West Conservatory had been derelict for decades. His grandmother had loved it, but since her death, it had been left to decay. The glass was clouded with grime, panes were cracked, and the once exotic plants had withered into brown skeletons or been choked by weeds. It was a monument to the Blackwood neglect, a glasshouse of ghosts. He found her there, at the far end, in a small patch of sunlight that managed to pierce the gloom. She was not arranging flowers or doing needlepoint. She was on her knees on the dusty flagstones, a pair of gardening gloves on her hands, methodically clearing away the debris from around a single, stubborn rose bush that was still, against all odds, alive. Spread out beside her on a stone bench was not a novel, but a drafting paper, covered in architectural sketches and calculations. She was redesigning the conservatory. She was bringing another dead thing back to life. She looked up as he approached, her expression calm, her gray eyes revealing nothing. She did not seem surprised to see him. She simply waited. He stopped a few feet away from her, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. He held the copy of his letter in his hand. He did not know how to begin. The grand, eloquent speeches he might have given in Parliament failed him. All artifice was stripped away. leaving only the raw, ugly truth of his failure. "I found this," he said, his voice hoarse. He held out the letter. She looked at the paper, then back at his face. "I know," she said quietly. "I read it the first day I came to the estate office. The admission, so simple and without rancor, was more damning than any accusation. She had known from the very beginning. She had worked for months, saving him, saving his entire world, all while knowing he considered her an incompetent fool. "Eleanor," he began, using her given name for the first time. It felt strange and momentous. He took a step closer. "There is nothing I can say that will excuse this. No apology that is sufficient." He stopped, forcing himself to meet her clear, unwavering gaze. He had to make her understand. Not to win her forgiveness, he hadn't earned the right to ask for it, but to acknowledge the truth. "I was wrong," he said, the words costing him more than any sum of money ever could. They were an admission of a bankruptcy of character, not of coin. "I was wrong about everything. I looked at you, and I saw a solution, a convenience. I saw a name without a title and a fortune without a history. I did not see you. I was blind. I wrote those words because I was an arrogant fool, and I have been living with the consequences of that foolishness ever since, without even having the intelligence to realize it." He gestured around the decaying conservatory, then back at the letter. "You came into this house, a place of ruin and pride, and you fixed it. You did it quietly, brilliantly, and with no help from me. You did it while knowing that the man who should have been your partner believed you incapable of managing a tea tray." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "You have managed my life's work. You have managed my history and my future. You have saved this family from its own incompetence, and I have done nothing but stand in your way." She watched him, her expression still unreadable, but he thought he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not pity, not triumph, something else, something deeper. He took another step, his voice dropping, losing its declamatory edge and becoming something more raw, more personal. "I don't ask you to forgive me. I haven't earned that. I am asking you to let me start again, to let me see the woman I was too stupid to notice, was there all along." At that moment, a footman appeared at the far end of the conservatory, looking flustered. "Your Grace, Lord Fitzwilliam is here. He insists on seeing you. He says it is a matter of business." Alistair felt a surge of cold fury. Fitzwilliam, circling again, no doubt having heard some gossip, perhaps sniffing for a chance to buy the southern forests he'd always coveted. An idea, sharp and clear, formed in his mind. An opportunity, a public act to replace a private shame. "Send him in, Thomas," Alistair said, his voice suddenly firm. He turned back to Eleanor. "Stay, please." Fitzwilliam strode into the conservatory, his boots crunching on the debris. He took in the scene: the Duke, the Duchess on her knees in the dirt, the general air of decay, and a smug smile touched his lips. "Blackwood," he began, foregoing any real pleasantry, "I came to make you an offer on the South Woods. I know things have been tight, and I'm prepared to be generous. A quick sale, cash in hand." Alistair did not even look at his rival. His eyes were fixed on Eleanor. He walked over to her, extending a hand. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her gloved hand in his, and he helped her to her feet. He kept her hand in his, turning them both to face Fitzwilliam as a united front. "There seems to be a misunderstanding, Fitzwilliam," Alistair said, his voice ringing with a new, calm authority. "The Blackwood estate is not for sale. Not 1 acre, not 1 tree." Fitzwilliam scoffed. "Don't be a fool, man. Everyone knows you were on the brink." "We were," Alistair corrected him, his grip on Eleanor's hand tightening slightly. "But you see, you, like I, made the grave error of underestimating my wife. You see a merchant's daughter. I have learned to see a financial genius." He looked at Eleanor, his expression open and sincere. "The Duchess has taken over the management of the estate's finances. Thanks to her astute strategies, Our timber contracts are more profitable than ever. Our tenant farms are thriving, and for the first time in 50 years, this estate is turning a profit. There will be no sale of Blackwood land. Not now, not ever. Is that clear? He delivered the words directly to Fitzwilliam, but they were meant for Eleanor. It was a public declaration, a validation, an atonement made manifest. Fitzwilliam stared, his jaw slack, his smugness evaporating into pure, baffled fury. He looked from Alistair's resolute face to Eleanor's calm one. He saw no weakness, no crack to exploit. He saw a fortress. He sputtered a curse, turned on his heel, and stormed out of the conservatory. Silence descended again, thicker this time. Alistair turned back to Eleanor. He was still holding her hand. "The first transaction is complete," she said, her voice very low. She gently withdrew her hand from his. "The original marriage contract has been fulfilled." He understood. The debt was paid. The business was concluded. His public defense of her was the final payment on an account he hadn't known was open, but it did not mean a new one had begun. "I don't want a transaction, Eleanor," he said softly. "I want a marriage." She looked at the sketches on the stone bench, at the plans for rebuilding, for bringing light and life back into this broken space. "A marriage, like a conservatory, must be built," she said. "It requires a solid foundation, and trust is the foundation. It has been fractured." She did not say it was shattered beyond repair. She said it was fractured. It was the smallest opening, the barest glimmer of hope, and he seized upon it as a drowning man seizes a rope. "Then let me rebuild it," he pleaded. "Let me earn it. Show me how." She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw not a manager, not a creditor, not a duchess, but a woman, considering a proposal, a real one, this time. "You can stop Maleket," she said, a tiny ironic smile touching her lips for the very first time. "By helping me with these weeds." And so he did. The Duke of Blackwood got down on his knees in the dirt and began to work. He did not see it as penance. He saw it as the first day of his real marriage. The rebuilding of Blackwood had begun, not with money, but with the quiet, shared labor of two people in a ruined glass house, starting over. He learned the rhythm of her work, the quiet competence of her hands. He learned to listen, not just to her words, but to her silences. He brought her tea on a tray and managed not to spill it. It was a start. A year passed. Then another. The West Conservatory was no longer a house of ghosts. Sunlight streamed through newly glazed panes, warming the air and illuminating 1,000 shades of green. Exotic orchids bloomed alongside sturdy English roses. It was a space of vibrant, managed beauty, a testament to a partnership. Alistair and Eleanor often took their breakfast there, at a small iron table set amongst the ferns. The estate ledgers were sometimes spread out between them, but just as often it was a book of poetry or the day's newspaper. Their conversations were easy now, a comfortable blend of estate, business, and personal observation. He had learned the landscape of her mind, its sharp intelligence, its dry wit, its surprising depths of compassion. She had, in turn, discovered the man beneath the arrogant duke, a man capable of profound change, of deep loyalty, and of a quiet, steadfast love. He watched her one morning as she explained a new plan for a small mill on the river, her finger tracing a line on a map. The light caught in her hair, and he was struck, as he often was, by her beauty. It was not the dazzling beauty of the ballroom, but something quieter, more fundamental. It was the beauty of intelligence, of competence, of a spirit that had refused to be overlooked. Their son, Arthur, now 6 months old, gurgled in a bassinet nearby, a symbol of the new life they had cultivated together. The Blackwood name was secure, its fortune not just restored but growing. The house was no longer a silent, efficient machine, but a home, filled with the sounds of life and, often, laughter. Eleanor looked up and caught him watching her. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that still had the power to take his breath away. "What is it?" she asked. "I was just thinking," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand, "about the day I found you in here, surrounded by ruin. And dirt," she added, her eyes twinkling. "You were appalled." "One. I was humbled," he corrected her gently. "I was a man who had spent his whole life looking at things, at land, at titles, at people, and seeing only their value, their use. That day, in this room, I finally learned to see their worth." He squeezed her hand. "I finally learned to see you." She did not need to answer. Her worth was not something that required his validation anymore. It was a fact, as solid and real as the restored conservatory around them, as the thriving estate beyond its walls, as the sleeping child who carried both their legacies. He had not given her a voice. He had simply, finally, learned to listen to the one she'd had all along. And in learning to see his wife, the Duke of Blackwood had, at last, saved himself.